With Mira Volny and Garbos we agree on such, I would say, a classic Krupka triangle, that is Děčín and then a bit beyond Sirtak, let's say to Radabil and back. Today the conditions are good for that, because the wind is supposed to be westerly, not too strong. That means we should be able to make it to the triangle, but the westerly wind should help us with the first leg to Děčín. After that, in the strongest conditions of the day, it will be a bit upwind and the final leg should be more or less crosswind. So it should be possible to fly it. The triangle here has the advantage that the last third leg, so you can stretch then along the ridge to very far, even to Litvinov. I don't gain much altitude at first. From the takeoff I fly right to the windward side, where there is a better chance that it won't flush right away, but I don't manage to gain much altitude. Even though I'm taking off for about his third that day, I can see about 6 wings in front of me flying off at a time. But in a situation like that, I think it's important not to panic and to calmly top out the thermal that you have as high as you can, because in the morning the conditions, of course, you have to be grateful for every thermal there, rather than going somewhere with a low lift. So I'm also often tempted to just depart right after somebody, that yeah, I'll think, they'll help me, but you just could be, I don't know, 100 meters below them and you just don't have to get up in a thermal. So for me it's definitely better to top out and go after the other pilots. And the more you have a good attitude towards them, then the better they can help you with those thermal climbs. So they'll spend some time finding and coring a thermal and then when you go after them, you come to a done deal. By having a lot of these pilots in front of me, I can pick and choose which thermals to thermal and which ones not to thermal. So if I see some pilots out there doing some zero and I see someone else in front of them going up faster, I'll skip that zero thermal and go to where people are going up faster. Then I gradually get to the first place of the peloton and approach the dreaded Libouchec, where pilots often bomb out during flights from Krupka. I try to thermal as much as I can, but I don't get that high. So I jump to Libouchec with quite a small height. I see a cloud over it, so I think it might work. And there's actually some thermal that's really weak at the start. It's just like a 0 or a 1 meter per second. And I suspect it might be a little stronger downwind, but I'm only going up there in little bits and pieces, because again, my experience has been that when you get out of a thermal into the sink, it's awfully hard to get back up. You actually fall through the sink after a thermal and you don't have to go back up. So I try not to fall out of it downwind, and I'd rather thermal a weaker thermal up front than just jump into a core that I'm not sure is there. So above Libouchec I'll eventually get up. Then Mira tells me on the radio that he doesn't want to go under the dark cloud that is over the plateau behind Děčín. And I don't hear that and fly there anyway. And my experience is that under such big clouds, there are usually no awesome thermals, but quite often it doesn't sink much, or it even rises slightly. So I fly under that cloud for a long time, some 0.5 meters per second up, sometimes 0.5 meters per second up, sometimes 0.5 meters per second down, and just skip the whole cloud nicely like that. Then the plan was to fly to Rozovsky VRCH, but there I can see that it's getting very shaded. Actually, even the slopes before that, which are quite windward, are pretty much obscured though. So I'm going to turn and head for Děčín. And beyond Děčín, the air is very lively. I'd say it's because the air in that city is getting a lot of signals and little bubbles are coming off. So every once in a while I'll hit a little bubble, it'll lift me up a little bit, but it's not a good thermal. If I bite through those bubbles a little bit higher, it's only when those bubbles come together into some more consistent thermal that I can actually get a nice lift up to the cloud base for the first time today. Unfortunately, the rest of the group dropped pretty low and are recovering from low altitude. And now I have to make my own decisions, and I'm actually deciding pretty early on to turn towards the second leg. It's not that important with these triangles, yeah, especially here on terrain like Krupka, because you can always stretch it with the third leg, yeah. So the first leg can be 10 kilometers long, and if the second leg is 30 kilometers long, you can still make a 100 FAI triangle, yeah. So the first leg is not very important. So I actually pick the place where I turn based on where I think there's some clouds forming and at the same time it's not completely dark. Yeah, so I choose where I turn based on the clouds. And so the second hardest leg starts, which is almost exactly upwind, and it's flying over these plateaus. I've landed there in the past too, so I know it just doesn't work over them. But by the fact that it's windward, it's key to always get in front of those plateaus, yeah. And there's a pretty good chance there's gonna be some thermal. There in that valley, the air is just rushing and rising up against those slopes that are in front of those plateaus. Fortunately, I get a little lift over that plateau, but there's not a nice thermal, but I get up enough to actually get in front of the plateau to the windward slope, which then has a nice thermal. I'd say that's where the really big advantage of having a wing with high performance comes in. Actually, if you're doing a downwind flight or doing some triangle in no wind, you can fly on ENB wings just as well, yeah. The speed on the trim is almost the same, but this way, if you fly into that wind, with I'd say maybe 5 meters per second in some levels, yeah. It also varied a lot with height. At the very top it was a little less windy, oddly enough. It was strongest in the mid-levels and then low down it was a little bit weaker. But that way when you're flying into a wind that's strong, there's really the fact that I can push the speed bar and the wing is still flying and not coming down like a rock, so that's a big advantage. So I was really glad to have a wing with good performance. I feel like that day is going off pretty nicely. So at Libouchec, I decide to stretch up behind it. I usually kind of calculate in my head how much I have for that individual leg, yeah, of course there's a consideration of which legs are downwind and which are upwind, but today I took off say after 11 o'clock. It works, as I checked yesterday, until about 1800 hours. With some margin I have say 6 hours. That means roughly 2 hours on each leg. Yeah, that's how I always estimate how much I have per leg. I actually shortened the first leg, I turned that much earlier, but just on that second turn point, I think it's reasonable to be in about 4 hours total, yeah, to get to the finish in 2 hours. With that said, again, it's possible to stretch that third leg afterwards, but like I said, the second leg is the most important of all, because if the second leg is short, then you can't stretch the triangle. So I'm going to stretch the second leg. I'm stretching up to actually below the airspace, there's the TMA where the flatlands are already, yeah, so I'm orienting myself by the flatlands. I've got enough altitude at first, so I'm flying by the clouds, but then lower, so I'm always trying to find some dark areas lit up ideally, and then I'm waiting for a thermal above them. When I turn back, I can see high clouds starting to move in from the southwest, which I can tell is going to dampen it down quite a bit, and those clouds that have been pretty much everywhere so far are starting to pick their spots. And I would need to push a lot to the west already, yeah, but it's just completely blue in the west, there's no clouds, and then the high clouds are moving from the west, so I'm flying more to the north, and those clouds are being pushed towards Lake Děčín, yeah. And then sometimes under certain conditions, it's possible to go back along that ridge, but I don't think that would be the case today because the ridge is already very shaded. It would be upwind, the ridge would be blown, so I don't think it would be possible today. So I'm just thinking, at some point, I've just got to turn it on that cloud street that runs, let's say, to the northeast, at some point to the northwest. I'd say that sometimes those blue holes don't matter, yeah. Sometimes it's just that there's not as much moisture in the air. Some places might be drier and there might be thermals in the blue holes, yeah. But it's not like that today, because there's a lot of moisture everywhere. You can see that the clouds are slowly breaking up and they're just juicy a lot. So it's clear that today, just where there's a thermal, there's almost certainly a cloud above it, yeah. So it's clear to me that there's not going to be anything in that blue hole today, but like I said, at some point I have to make a decision and I have to turn back towards Krupka. So where can you get to via Malata? And for a while it looks like I might be able to fly over Malata, but then it really gets very shady and doesn't work anywhere. The interesting thing is that I'm still actually flying here in 2 to 3 meters per second sinks and wondering where they come from, yeah. My explanation is that the cold air that's up in those layers just flows down and out past the cloud. So it's no longer like there's a thermal and a sink right next to it, but there's just a pretty big area where it's just sinking and actually the cold air that's rushing down is pushing away the existing air that's down on the ground. Just sideways, yeah. So that's my explanation. I'm not going to make a flight over the Malata and therefore not close the triangle by some 700 meters, so the triangle is actually unclosed, but never mind. So it was a nice flight. I underestimated how cloudy it would be that afternoon. We were already going to Krupka, so I could see that there was a lot of high clouds, but fortunately they disappeared before we got to the takeoff, and then it was nice to fly all day, but in the afternoon a new one just came and grounded the whole thing, so it was unclosed, but never mind. I still enjoyed it, it was nice.